My name's Eric, I'm 34, and my wife, Rachel, is 31. We've been married for 7 years and have 2 kids together. Emily, who's 6, and Josh, who's 4. Up until a few months ago, I thought we had a good life. We weren't perfect, but who is? Rachel was a stay-at-home mom, taking care of the kids while I worked full-time as a sales rep. She always seemed happy, or at least I thought she was. But recently, things started to feel off. Rachel became distant, snappy, and just different. She'd spend hours on her phone, laughing at messages but never sharing what was so funny. When I asked, she'd say, "Oh, it's just Sarah, her best friend," and brush me off. It wasn't just the phone. She started going out more, claiming she needed me time or had book club meetings. At first, I didn't question it. She's a great mom, and I figured she deserved a break. But then the book club nights started happening too, sometimes 3 times a week. One night, she came home late, and I noticed something odd. She was wearing a new perfume I didn't recognize. Strong and floral, not the subtle scents she usually preferred. When I commented on it, she laughed and said, "Oh, Sarah, let me try hers. Isn't it nice?" It sounded innocent enough, but something about her tone didn't sit right with me. That's when the doubts started creeping in. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was being paranoid. But the little things kept adding up. Her mood swings, the late nights, the way she'd lock her phone whenever I walked into the room. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. At that point, I didn't know what to believe. But I was about to find out, and it would be so much worse than I ever imagined. The discovery happened about 2 weeks after I started noticing all the signs. It was a Saturday afternoon, and Rachel was out running errands. Or so she said. The kids were napping, and I was cleaning up around the house when her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. Rachel was usually glued to her phone, so it was rare to see it lying around unattended. I glanced at the screen, and a notification caught my eye. It was a Snapchat message from someone named Cameron Basketball. Cameron? I didn't know any Cameron, and the basketball emoji felt strange. My gut told me to look, but my hands were shaking as I picked up the phone. I knew I was crossing a line, but the nagging doubt had been eating me alive. The message was still visible on the lock screen. "Can't stop thinking about last night winking face." My stomach dropped. I unlocked the phone. Yes, I knew her password. It was the kids' birthdates, and opened Snapchat. What I found hit me like a freight train. There were dozens of messages between Rachel and Cameron. Most of them were flirty, her calling him cutie, him calling her gorgeous. But some were far worse. Explicit texts, suggestive photos. And then there was the video. Rachel, sitting in her car, giggling like a schoolgirl, saying, "I can't wait to see you again, babe." I was shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. Who was this guy? My mind raced with possibilities, but then I scrolled up to one of Cameron's earlier messages. "Hope you don't mind I was late. Coach kept us after practice again." Practice? Coach? It hit me like a ton of bricks. Cameron wasn't just some random guy. He was a teenager, a high school kid. I felt sick. I put the phone down, pacing the kitchen as the weight of what I'd just seen crashed down on me. This couldn't be real. Rachel, my wife, the mother of my kids, was cheating on me with a kid from school. The sound of the garage door opening snapped me out of my daze. Rachel was home. My mind was spinning as I tried to figure out what to do next. Confront her now? Wait and gather more evidence? The only thing I knew for sure was that the woman I thought I knew was hiding something so much darker than I'd ever imagined. Rachel walked into the kitchen, humming to herself, bags of groceries in her arms. She flashed me a quick smile, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. "Hey, hon," she said, setting the bags on the counter. "Can you grab the milk from the car?" I didn't move. I was standing there, phone in hand, staring at her. "Eric?" she said, her smile fading. "What's wrong?" I held up her phone, the Snapchat thread with Cameron open on the screen. "Who's Cameron?" Her face went pale. For a split second, she froze, but then she recovered, letting out a forced laugh. "What are you talking about? Cameron's just..." "Don't..." I cut her off, my voice shaking. "Don't you dare lie to me, Rachel. I saw the messages. I saw everything. Can't stop thinking about last night? Who the hell is Cameron? And what are you doing with him? She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like she was searching for an excuse. Finally, she crossed her arms and said, "Why were you going through my phone? That's such an invasion of privacy, Eric." I slammed the phone down on the counter, the sound making her flinch. "Don't turn this around on me. You're cheating on me, Rachel, with some kid. He's in high school. For God's sake." Her eyes darted around the room, avoiding mine. "You're blowing this out of proportion," she said, her voice defensive. "Cameron's just a friend. It's nothing serious." "Nothing serious?" I barked, my anger boiling over. "You're sending him pictures, meeting up with him, and calling him babe. You're a married woman, Rachel. You're a mother." She rolled her eyes, her expression turning icy. "Oh, please, don't act so righteous, Eric. It's not like you've been the perfect husband. You're always working, always tired. When's the last time you even took me out on a date? Cameron, he makes me feel wanted. Like I'm still attractive." I was stunned. "So this is my fault now? You're blaming me for your decision to cheat on me with a teenager?" Rachel shrugged, leaning against the counter with a smug look on her face. "If you'd paid more attention to me, maybe I wouldn't have needed to look elsewhere." Her words hit like a punch to the gut. I stared at her, trying to process the sheer audacity of what she was saying. "He's a kid, Rachel. Do you even realize how wrong this is? This isn't just cheating. It's predatory." Her face twisted with anger. "Oh, don't be so dramatic, Eric. You're making it sound worse than it is. We're just having fun. It's not like I'm leaving you or anything." That was it. I couldn't take any more. "You've already left, Rachel," I said, my voice cold and steady. "The moment you started sneaking around with Cameron, you ended this marriage. You just didn't have the guts to admit it." She opened her mouth to respond, but I didn't stick around to hear it. I grabbed my keys and walked out the door, leaving her standing there in the kitchen. I needed space, time to think, and a plan. Because one thing was clear. There was no coming back from this. Driving aimlessly through town, I felt like my entire world had collapsed. The woman I'd built my life around, the mother of my children, had betrayed me in the most disgusting way possible. The betrayal was bad enough, but the fact that it was with a teenager, a kid, made it so much worse. Couldn't wrap my head around it. Rachel wasn't just unfaithful. She was reckless, selfish, and, frankly, dangerous. The emotions came in waves. At first, I was furious. How could she do this to me? To our kids? To herself? Every time I thought about her excuses, about how she tried to blame me, I wanted to scream. Then came the sadness. Our marriage wasn't perfect, but I thought it was solid. We'd had our arguments, sure, but I never doubted that we were in this together. I kept thinking about our wedding day, the promises we made, the life we'd built. Had it all been a lie? By the time I parked in a quiet lot near the park, the guilt started creeping in. Was this my fault? Had I worked too much? Ignored her needs? Maybe if I'd been more attentive, more romantic, she wouldn't have gone looking for attention elsewhere. But then I thought about Cameron, about how she'd laughed it off, called it just fun, and the guilt turned back into anger. This wasn't my fault. Rachel made her choices. She chose to lie, to cheat, to risk everything for some twisted fling with a high school kid. I stayed in the car for hours trying to figure out what to do next. Part of me wanted to pack up the kids and leave, but where would I go? Another part wanted to confront Cameron's parents, but would that make things worse? Eventually, I drove back home. Rachel was on the couch, scrolling through her phone like nothing had happened. She didn't even look up when I walked in. "How was your drive?" she asked, her tone dripping with sarcasm. I didn't answer. I went straight to the guest room, grabbed a spare pillow and blanket, and set up camp on the couch. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling and listening to the silence of the house. My mind was racing with questions I didn't have answers to. What would this do to the kids? How could I ever trust her again? I didn't know what the future held, but one thing was clear. Things would never be the same. The next morning, I woke up to Rachel hovering over me, her arms crossed and her face twisted with annoyance. "So, are we going to talk about this?" she snapped. I sat up, groggy and still reeling from the night before. "Talk about what, Rachel? The fact that you're cheating on me with a teenager? Or the fact that you don't even seem to care about what you've done?" She rolled her eyes, clearly unimpressed by my sarcasm. "Oh, come on, Eric. Don't act like this is the end of the world. It's not like I was planning to leave you." Her indifference hit me like a slap. "Do you even hear yourself?" I said, my voice rising. "You're talking about this like it's some minor mistake. Rachel, you've crossed every line imaginable. This isn't just about us, it's about the kids, your reputation, his family. Do you have any idea how serious this is?" She sighed, brushing her hair out of her face. "You're overreacting. Cameron's not some random kid. He's mature for his age. Besides, it's not like anyone's going to find out." Her smugness was unbearable. "You're delusional," I said, standing up. "What happens if his parents find out? What happens if someone sees your messages or pictures? Do you realize how easily this could blow up in your face?" For the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed her face. "Eric," she said, her voice softening, "I didn't mean for this to happen. I've been feeling so lost lately, so unappreciated. And Cameron made me feel alive again." "Alive?" I echoed, my voice thick with disbelief. "Rachel, you're a grown woman with 2 kids. You don't get to justify this by saying he made you feel alive. This isn't a midlife crisis. It's a disaster." She looked away, her confidence faltering. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she said quietly. I stared at her, searching for any sign of the woman I married. But all I saw was someone who didn't fully grasp the damage she'd done. "You already did," I said. "And I don't think I can ever forgive you for this." She didn't respond, just stood there looking stunned as I walked away. I needed air, a break from the suffocating weight of her presence. Later that afternoon, I made a decision. I needed advice from someone outside this mess, someone who could help me figure out my next steps. I called my sister, Jenna. She was the only person I trusted to keep this private and give me honest feedback. Jenna listened in stunned silence as I laid everything out. When I finished, she let out a long sigh. "Eric, this isn't something you can ignore. You need to think about your kids, your future. Rachel made her choices, and now you have to make yours." Her words stayed with me long after we hung up. She was right. This wasn't just about Rachel and me anymore. I had to protect myself and the kids from whatever fallout was coming next. The only question was how. Over the next few days, I focused on putting together a plan. I knew I couldn't let Rachel's recklessness destroy everything. Not for me, not for our kids. The first step was gathering evidence. As much as I hated playing detective in my own marriage, I knew it was necessary. I went through Rachel's phone again while she was in the shower, taking screenshots of her conversations with Cameron. Every flirty text, every inappropriate photo, every incriminating message. I saved them all and sent them to my email. Next, I started documenting her behavior. Every time she came home late, every excuse she made, I wrote it down. I also began keeping track of her spending. Over the past few months, she'd been dipping into our joint account for what she called personal expenses. And I had a sinking feeling a lot of that money was tied to her outings with Cameron. I scheduled a meeting with a divorce lawyer someone Jenna had recommended. Sitting in that office felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life fall apart. But the lawyer was sharp and reassuring. "You're doing the right thing," she said, flipping through the evidence I'd brought. "With what you've shown me, you have a strong case for custody and financial protection." The next step was the hardest, figuring out how to protect my kids. Emily and Josh were too young to understand what was happening, but I couldn't let Rachel's actions hurt them. I started looking into temporary custody arrangements, just in case things got ugly. Meanwhile, Rachel acted like nothing was wrong. She'd come home, play with the kids, and scroll through her phone like our confrontation had never happened. It was infuriating, but I kept my cool. The lawyer advised me not to tip my hand too early. Then, something unexpected happened. I got a call from the school principal. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice cautious. "I need to discuss something sensitive with you regarding your wife." My heart sank. "What is it?" "We've received complaints from several parents who've noticed Rachel spending time with one of the students outside of school events. While we don't have concrete evidence, the rumors are spreading, and it's becoming a concern for the school's reputation." I felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me. The situation was spiraling faster than I could control. "Thank you for letting me know," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "I'll address it immediately." When I hung up, I sat in stunned silence. Rachel wasn't just endangering our family. She was putting herself and even Cameron at risk. It was time to act. I couldn't wait for her to realize the damage she'd done. I had to protect my kids and myself before things got even worse. That evening, when Rachel came home, I was waiting for her in the living room. The kids were upstairs playing, their laughter a heartbreaking contrast to the storm brewing downstairs. Rachel walked in with her usual nonchalance, tossing her bag onto the couch. "What's with the serious face?" she asked, her tone laced with fake cheerfulness. I stood up, holding my phone in one hand and the printed documents from the lawyer in the other. "The school called me today, Rachel," I said, my voice cold. Her face froze, and for a moment, I thought I saw panic flash in her eyes. But then she quickly recovered, crossing her arms and smirking. "Oh, really? And what did they say?" "They've heard the rumors about you and Cameron," I said, stepping closer. "Parents are complaining. The school's reputation is at risk. Do you understand how serious this is?" Rachel scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Oh, please. People love to gossip. They're just jealous because I look good and have a social life." Her dismissive attitude made my blood boil. "This isn't gossip, Rachel. This is about you making reckless decisions that are putting everyone at risk. Do you even care what this could do to the kids?" "To me." She dropped the smirk and narrowed her eyes. "Don't drag the kids into this, Eric. This has nothing to do with them." "Doesn't it?" I shot back. "What happens if this gets out? What happens when Emily and Josh are old enough to understand? Do you think they'll be proud of their mom for hooking up with a teenager?" Her face turned red, but instead of backing down, she doubled down. "You don't get it, do you? I've spent the last 7 years taking care of this family, sacrificing my dreams, my freedom, my happiness. Cameron is the first person in years who's made me feel alive." Her words stung, but I refused to let her manipulate the narrative. "You don't get to play the victim here, Rachel. I've worked my ass off to provide for this family while you've been sneaking around with a kid. This isn't about your happiness. It's about your selfishness." She threw her hands up in frustration. "What do you want me to say, Eric? That I'm sorry? Fine. I'm sorry. But I'm not ending things with Cameron. He's not some fling. He understands me in ways you never could." That was it. The breaking point. I took a deep breath, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and sadness. "Then this marriage is over, Rachel. I've already spoken to a lawyer. I'm filing for divorce, and I'm fighting for custody of the kids. You've left me no choice." Her eyes widened, and for the first time her confidence cracked. "You can't be serious," she said, her voice shaky. "I've never been more serious," I said, holding up the documents. "I've got evidence. I've got witnesses. And I've got the school's complaints. You've destroyed this marriage, Rachel. Now you have to face the consequences." She stared at me, stunned into silence. For a moment, I thought she might apologize, beg for another chance. But instead, she grabbed her bag and stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind her. As the sound of her car engine faded into the distance, I sat back down on the couch, feeling a strange mix of devastation and relief. This wasn't how I envisioned my life, but at least now I could see a way forward. The days following Rachel's departure were a blur of chaos and heartbreak. I called Jenna again and filled her in on everything: the school complaints, Rachel's refusal to end things with Cameron, and the decision to file for divorce. Her reaction was a mix of shock and support. "Eric, you're doing the right thing," Jenna said. "This isn't just about you anymore. It's about protecting the kids." And that's exactly what I focused on. My lawyer wasted no time filing the divorce papers, citing Rachel's infidelity and reckless behavior as grounds. She also advised me to petition for temporary custody of Emily and Josh, given the severity of the situation. Rachel, on the other hand, wasn't making things easy. She came back a few days later, claiming she wanted to talk, but it quickly turned into a shouting match. "You're blowing this way out of proportion, Eric," she yelled, pacing the living room. "I'm still their mother. You have no right to take them away from me." "I'm not taking them away from you," I said, trying to stay calm. "I'm protecting them. Do you even understand how damaging this could be if it becomes public? You've already involved the school, Rachel. What happens if the authorities get involved?" Her face paled at that, but she quickly masked it with anger. "You're just trying to punish me because I found someone who makes me happy." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "This isn't about punishment, Rachel. This is about responsibility, something you seem to have completely forgotten about." When she realized she wasn't going to win the argument, she stormed out again, slamming the door so hard it rattled the windows. Meanwhile, the fallout from her actions continued to grow. The school called me again, this time to inform me that they were launching an internal investigation. Cameron's parents had also been notified, and they were understandably furious. "Mr. Carter," the principal said during the call, "I know this is a personal matter, but we have to take this seriously. If there's any evidence that supports the claims, we may need to involve law enforcement." The thought of the police getting involved made my stomach churn, but it also reinforced my resolve. Rachel's actions had consequences, and it was time she faced them. Over the next week, I focused on creating as much stability as possible for Emily and Josh. I kept our routines normal, took them to the park, and read them bedtime stories like always. They were too young to understand the full scope of what was happening, but they could sense the tension. "Where's Mommy?" Emily asked one night, her big eyes filled with confusion. I swallowed hard, forcing a smile. "Mommy's staying somewhere else for a little while," I said gently. "But she loves you very much, and so do I." It was one of the hardest things I've ever had to say. As the days turned into weeks, Rachel's absence became the new normal. I started to feel a sense of relief, even amidst the chaos. For the first time in months, I wasn't walking on eggshells or bracing myself for the next argument. But I knew the fight wasn't over. There were still legal battles to be won, custody arrangements to finalize, and the lingering question of what would happen when Rachel's relationship with Cameron came to light. The fallout was far from over, but at least now I was ready to face it head-on. The legal process moved faster than I expected, largely because of the overwhelming evidence against Rachel. My lawyer submitted the screenshots, text messages, and even statements from the school's investigation. Cameron's parents also cooperated, expressing outrage over Rachel's behavior and confirming their son's involvement. When Rachel was served with the divorce papers, she called me in a fit of rage. "You're really going through with this?" she shouted. "After everything we've been through, you're just throwing it all away?"
"No, Rachel," he replied calmly.
"You threw it all away. I'm just picking up the pieces." The court granted me temporary custody of Emily and Josh while the divorce proceedings continued. Rachel fought back, of course, but her erratic behavior and the evidence of her affair made her case weak. During one hearing, her lawyer tried to argue that Rachel's relationship with Cameron was consensual and didn't affect her ability to parent. My lawyer shut that down immediately. "Your Honor," she said, "this isn't just a question of poor judgment. It's a pattern of reckless behavior that jeopardizes the well-being of both the children and the family's reputation." Rachel sat in stunned silence, her confidence unraveling. In the end, the judge ruled in my favor. I was granted primary custody of the kids, with Rachel allowed supervised visitation until she could demonstrate stability. She was also ordered to attend counseling and pay a portion of my legal fees, given the circumstances. When the final ruling came down, I felt a mix of relief and sadness. Relief that I'd protected my children and taken control of my life, but sadness that this was how our marriage had ended. Rachel, for her part, tried to maintain her defiance, but the cracks in her armor were clear. She moved out of town shortly after the divorce was finalized, and our communication became limited to discussions about the kids. As for Cameron, the school expelled him after their investigation concluded. I heard through mutual acquaintances that his parents pulled him out of the district entirely, hoping to give him a fresh start somewhere else. I didn't blame them. It wasn't his fault, and I hoped he could move on from this mess. In the months that followed, I focused on rebuilding. I threw myself into my role as a single dad, creating a stable, loving environment for Emily and Josh. It wasn't always easy. There were nights when the loneliness crept in, and I found myself questioning how everything had gone so wrong. But slowly, I began to heal. I started therapy, leaned on friends and family for support, and even picked up some new hobbies to distract myself. Through it all, I learned that life doesn't end with betrayal, it just changes. And sometimes that change is exactly what you need. It's been a year since the divorce was finalized, and while life isn't perfect, it's finally starting to feel normal again. The kids have adjusted better than I expected. Emily and Josh are resilient, and I've done everything I can to give them a sense of security and stability. They ask about Rachel sometimes, and I always answer honestly but gently. She visits them occasionally, but those visits are supervised and sporadic. I can tell she's struggling to rebuild her life, but I've learned to let that be her problem, not mine. Looking back, I've realized just how much I ignored in those early months when things started to feel off. The distance, the secrecy, the constant excuses. I brushed it all aside, convincing myself that I was being paranoid. But if there's one thing this experience has taught me, it's to trust my gut. I've also learned the importance of setting boundaries. Rachel's betrayal cut deep, but her refusal to take responsibility was what really opened my eyes. I used to think love meant endless forgiveness, but I've come to understand that love without respect and accountability isn't love at all. Therapy has been a game changer for me. It's helped me process the anger and sadness, and it's given me tools to rebuild my confidence. For a long time, I blamed myself for what happened, wondering if I worked too much or didn't show Rachel enough affection. But I've let go of that guilt. Her choices were hers alone, and they had nothing to do with my worth as a husband or a father. I've started dating again, cautiously but optimistically. It's strange navigating the world of relationships as a single dad, but I've met a few kind, understanding people who remind me that not everyone is like Rachel. For anyone reading this who's going through a similar situation, here's my advice. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, don't ignore it. Gather evidence. It's not about being sneaky. It's about protecting yourself and your children if things escalate. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Whether it's from a lawyer, a therapist, or a trusted friend, having support can make all the difference. Focus on what matters. For me, that was my kids. They kept me grounded and gave me a reason to keep moving forward. Betrayal is one of the hardest things to endure, but it doesn't define you. It's a chapter, not the whole book. I've learned that I'm stronger than I thought, and while I wouldn't wish this experience on anyone, it's shown me that life can go on, even after the worst heartbreak. Thank you for staying with me. This crazy journey is finally over and I'm ready for what's next. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any more interesting stories. And leave a comment with what you would do in this situation. See you in the next videos.